In an essay entitled Feeling for a Place, published in the Jewish Quarterly in 1969, Alfred Cohen wrote of his longing for pockets of nostalgia. Maybe I'm a romantic, he reflected, and my fate might be to run, always to run before the deadening and monotonous onslaught of motorway flyover, standardised high-rise blocks, carbon monoxide poisoning, acres and acres of car park, and other things that come from corporation land. Rural places are cast as antidotes to the alienating spaces of capitalist modernity. While Cohen spent most of his artistic life in big cities, in 1963 he moved to Kent, the so-called Garden of England, where he lived until he relocated to Norfolk in 1978. Cohen's Kent and also Sussex landscape suggest a longing not only for geographical sanctuary, but also for art itself as a retreat. He had much in common with earlier 20th century modernists in this respect. While the seedbed of modernism has often been assumed to be the metropolis, many modernists sought from rural locations a kind of reprieve from urban life. I wouldn't say that Cohen unthinkingly continued to plough a modernist furrow, however. His 1960s and 1970s landscapes raise still pertinent questions about modernism's future. Cohen's landscapes often feature rainbows. Rainbows which I think both tested his formalism and also encourage associations between a desire for retreat and a desire for redemption. This may have resonance with Cohen's Jewish background. The Old Testament ark, God's promise after his punishing flood, serves as a double symbol. It's a sign of peace and also simultaneously a remembrance of devastation. Cohen's rainbow paintings, however, present no evident plight or fall from which to rise. He gives few clues in the paintings themselves as to what kind of metaphorical flood his rainbows deliver him or his viewers from. Perhaps the arc in his 1975-6 painting, Rainbow over Fairlight, marks the redemption of the artwork itself. It would surely look unbalanced and far weaker without the rainbow. Without the intense colour at the top of the frame, it would get bogged down in green. A stripe or spot of red might have done the same work, however, and it remains curious that Cohen addressed a formalist problem with a shape as symbolically loaded as a rainbow. A purely aesthetic reading also does not take account of the way in which Cohen's work tends to balance abstraction with representation. If all Cohen cared for was balancing shapes and colours, then why paint landscapes at all? And why choose, in titling his works, to tether them so firmly to the ground and to particular locales? Fairlight, the subject of the painting previously referenced, is a small seaside village in East Sussex. Cohen was amongst many artists before and since, Millais and Holman Hunt included, who came to this relatively remote retreat to paint scenes. Might it follow, then, that the rainbow indicates that this countryside haven was a kind of promised land, a phrase Cohen uses in Feeling for a Place, offering deliverance from the flood of modernity? This reading is partly problematised by recognition that the scene that Cohen created in his painting was different from the one that existed in life, where traces of modernity could be seen. Cohen's formal rather than wholly representative treatment of his view allowed him to block out and make certain exclusions that utopian retreat seems always to involve. Recognising this, art would seem to be more of a promised land for Cohen than the place. This is not to suggest that Cohen painted charming idyllic scenes similar to those that proliferate in touristic picture postcards. To the contrary, his landscapes are markedly unsentimental. There are no pretty pinks and purples in Cohen's rainbow. There are also no fluffy clouds in his matte scarlet or deep blue skies. And the particular intense colours he uses is strange rather than familiarise his landscapes. Cohen does not retreat into a kind of English romanticism. His artistic interests seem to have been markedly European. A reason he gives for his nostalgic leanings was the influence of 19th and early 20th century painters who portrayed the Channel coast. Most were from France: Courbet, Boudin, Monet. It may be no coincidence here that his tripartite rainbow arching over Fairlight is coming from Europe and that it is reminiscent of the bands of a European tricolour flag. Cohen's rainbow is a bold smear of red, yellow and green, vivid and vibrant but crude rather than painstakingly rendered. The paint is layered on so thickly that there is something almost sculptural about it. His rainbows are no less substantial than the earth below them. Unlike a mechanically or digitally produced object, paint preserves the physical traces of the painter. Oil paint can memorialise the press and push of fingers, and, whether intentionally or not, Cohen did not always smooth his imprints away. That the rainbow is so clearly man-made may suggest that it is man, art, maybe paint itself, that is making the promises here, that is, doing the redemptive work the rainbow symbolises. Perhaps Cohen wanted to see if paint could save the rainbow from banalisation and sentimental association. Cohen's rainbow, massy, painterly, man-made, perhaps looks back to modernism's early optimism about the redemptive powers of art to undo alienation, to reconnect the maker with his creations, to express individuality against standardisation. Such ideas remain resonant at a time of digital reproduction in which mark-making unmediated by a machine has survived as a practice and as a desire. It seems significant, though, that the rainbow is broken. Was Cohen anxious about the limitations of his craft? In presenting incomplete rainbows, as he does in his Fairlight painting and in several others, was he casting doubt over any promises they might make? Breaking the bridge between his location in England and the country in which he had learned to paint, might he be flagging discontinuity between then and now? Of course, there might instead have been aesthetic reasons for his decision. The painting would have felt claustrophobic had the arc reached the land. There's also a formal similarity between the sharp vertical of the cliff face and the abrupt rainbow's end. Perhaps Cohen was cutting his rainbow short and reimagining the space for the sake of creating a more pleasing balance. That Cohen admitted to being nostalgic in his essay Feeling for a Place, however, does suggest an acknowledgement that the symbolism of a complete rainbow would have been inappropriate for his painting. With nostalgia, he acknowledged that there was something untimely about his work, and admitting, as all nostalgics must, the impossibility of return to both past times and places. Does Cohen's rainbow, then, speak of a modernism that knows its time is or will soon be up, but nonetheless continues? Where the future of modernism is in question, Cohen's arc becomes a sign of its hopefulness, but also acknowledges scepticism about the possibilities of redemption.